James Thompson stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, adjusting his collar for the third time. 42 years old with flecks of gray at his temples that hadn't been there when Lisa was alive. 5 years since cancer took her. 5 years of raising Ethan alone. 5 years without a date. Until today. The doorbell chimed precisely at 2 o'clock, sending a jolt through his body. He hadn't felt this nervous since his first day teaching 10th grade English. His fingers fumbled with the last button on his blue shirt, Lisa's favorite, as he called out to his son. Ethan, already at the door, turned to give his father an encouraging thumbs up. James took a deep breath and nodded. The door swung open. The woman standing on his porch took his breath away. Not just her striking beauty, auburn hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders, warm brown eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners, but something else, something strangely familiar. Before he could introduce himself, she leaned forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you. You're the man who saved my daughter's life. James froze, blood turning to ice in his veins. The marrow donation. 3 years ago. Anonymous. Nobody was supposed to know. His mind raced with questions, but before he could form words, his phone rang, the school's distinctive ringtone. Ethan has fallen during recess. The school nurse suspects a sprained ankle. Can you come right away? James ran a hand through his hair, already reaching for his keys hanging by the door. I'm so sorry about this. My son, I'll drive you. Rachel Carson stepped forward with quiet authority. You're too shaken to drive safely. In her car, a practical sedan with a child's science book in the back seat, James finally found his voice. How did you know about the donation? No one was supposed to know. Rachel kept her eyes on the road, hands steady at 10 and 2. My daughter Sophie received bone marrow from an anonymous donor 3 years ago. All we knew was that he was a local man in his late 30s. The donation saved her life. She paused, knuckles whitening slightly on the steering wheel. I never thought I'd find you. But how did you know it was me? James asked, bewilderment mixing with suspicion. Rachel glanced at him briefly. I didn't. Not until I saw the scar on your wrist when you opened the door. The harvest site. I've seen enough of them to recognize it instantly. So this wasn't really a blind date set up by my sister. James felt a strange mix of confusion and disappointment. It was, Rachel assured him. Your sister Jenny and I work at the same hospital. She has no idea about the connection. When she described you, I thought maybe, just maybe, but I wasn't sure until I saw you. The elementary school came into view, a low red brick building surrounded by autumn-touched maple trees. James studied Rachel's profile. She worked at the hospital. That made sense. He'd assumed she was a nurse from Jenny's description, but maybe she worked in administration. Or perhaps in the transplant program itself. They found Ethan sitting in the nurse's office, his freckled face tear-streaked, but trying hard to appear brave. His sneaker was off, sock-covered foot propped up on a chair, an ice pack balanced on his ankle. The moment he saw his father, the facade cracked slightly. It really hurts, Dad. I was just trying to make the basket and I landed wrong. James knelt beside his son, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Rachel remained in the doorway, observing quietly until Ethan noticed her. Who's that? His brown eyes, so like Lisa's, widened with curiosity. This is Rachel. She drove me here because my car... James fumbled for a believable explanation. Rachel stepped forward with professional confidence. Hi there, I'm Rachel. I'm a nurse and I'm going to take a look at that ankle if that's okay with you and your dad. Ethan glanced at his father, who nodded. Rachel knelt beside the chair, her movements gentle but efficient, as she removed the ice pack and carefully examined the swollen ankle. Her touch was both professional and tender. Good news, it's not broken. Just a mild sprain. Ice elevation and rest for a few days should do the trick. Tylenol for the pain. You'll be back on the basketball court in no time. Ethan's expression brightened. You're a doctor, a pediatric nurse. I take care of kids at the hospital. Rachel smiled, reapplying the ice pack. But I've seen plenty of sprains. Basketball players get them all the time. I'm going to be on the team this year. Ethan's chest puffed out slightly. Dad's been helping me practice. He was really good when he was in school. Was he now? Rachel's eyes met James's, a hint of amusement in them. The ride home was quieter. Ethan in the back seat holding an ice pack from the school nurse, occasionally asking Rachel questions about other injuries she'd treated. James watched the interaction through the rearview mirror, struck by the easy way she spoke to his son, not condescending but not overly simplified either. As they pulled into his driveway, Ethan leaned forward between the seats. "Can Rachel stay for a while? She knows all about my ankle and stuff." James looked at Rachel questioningly. Their coffee date had turned into something entirely unexpected. She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I'd love to, but only if your dad promises this still counts as our first date." Back inside the house, James settled Ethan on the living room couch with his favorite superhero movie, elevating his ankle on a pillow. Rachel moved around his kitchen with surprising ease, finding mugs for the coffee they'd originally planned to share at a cafe. The domesticity of it struck James. How long had it been since a woman other than his sister or mother had stood in this kitchen over coffee at the kitchen table? Rachel's expression grew serious. "I've been searching for 3 years. Not actively, they told me it was impossible. But I always wondered about the person who saved Sophie without ever asking for recognition or thanks." James stared into his coffee, watching the light ripple across its surface. "I didn't do it for recognition. When I registered as a donor in college, I never thought I'd actually match with someone. Then when I got the call," he trailed off, remembering. Rachel waited, giving him space to find the words. "My wife had just died." James's voice grew quieter. Helping someone else's child felt like, I don't know, like maybe it balanced the scales somehow. A moment of silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with understanding. "I'd like you to meet Sophie," Rachel said, suddenly setting down her mug. "She asks about her cell buddy all the time. That's what we call you. She draws pictures of what she thinks you might look like." James felt his throat tighten. "I'd like that. And I'm sure Ethan would too." From the living room, Ethan called out, "Dad, can Rachel stay for dinner?" "I'm hungry." James looked at Rachel questioningly. Their coffee date had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated. "I'd love to," she replied, her expression warm but unreadable. As Rachel helped prepare a simple dinner of pasta and salad, James found himself watching her, the confident way she moved, how she seemed comfortable in his space. She wasn't what he'd expected when Jenny had insisted on setting him up. She was more. They ate at the kitchen table, Ethan dominating the conversation with stories from school and questions about Rachel's job. "Does it make you sad taking care of sick kids sometimes?" Rachel admitted, twirling pasta on her fork. "But it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Except being Sophie's mom." "How old is Sophie?" Ethan asked. "She's 9, a year younger than you." Rachel smiled. "She loves science and drawing. I bet you two would get along." "Could I meet her sometime?" Ethan glanced at his father, seeking approval. "I think that could be arranged." James nodded, meeting Rachel's gaze across the table. After dinner, when Ethan had returned to his movie and James was washing dishes, Rachel leaned against the counter beside him. "I should probably go. It's getting late and Sophie's with my neighbor." James nodded, suddenly reluctant to see her leave. This wasn't how he'd pictured this afternoon going, but he couldn't deny that something about Rachel's presence felt right in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "I enjoyed today, despite the circumstances." Rachel gestured vaguely toward the living room where Ethan was sprawled on the couch. "He's a great kid, James. He is." James dried his hands on a dish towel. Lisa would be proud of him. A moment of silence settled between them at the mention of his late wife's name. "I should give you my number," Rachel said finally, "for when you want to arrange that play date, or—" She left the sentence unfinished, a question in her eyes. 2 weeks later, James stood nervously outside Rachel's front door, a bouquet of daisies in hand. Their second date, their first official one, without medical emergencies or revelations, was about to begin. But what made his heart race wasn't just seeing Rachel again. It was meeting Sophie. The door opened, and there stood a small girl with Rachel's auburn hair and a bright smile that lit up her entire face. "Are you my cell buddy?" she asked without preamble. James knelt down to her level. "I guess I am." Sophie threw her arms around his neck with the uninhibited affection only children can offer. "Thank you for saving my life." Her whisper sent a shiver down his spine. Over Sophie's shoulder, James saw Rachel watching them, tears glistening in her eyes. In that moment, something shifted in his heart. A space that had been closed since Lisa's death cracked open just enough to let in a ray of light. The evening was filled with laughter as Sophie showed James her drawings and science projects, while Rachel prepared dinner. It felt strangely familiar, like coming home to a place he'd never been before. After Sophie went to bed, Rachel and James sat on her porch swing, the night air cool around them. I never thought I'd feel this way again, James admitted. After Lisa died, I was sure that part of my life was over. Rachel's hand found his in the darkness. Life has a funny way of circling back, doesn't it? 3 years ago, a stranger saved my daughter without ever knowing her name. Now here we are, James echoed, squeezing her hand. The next morning, James' mother arrived unannounced, letting herself in with her spare key as she did every Sunday. Margaret Thompson, a formidable woman in her 70s with perfectly styled silver hair and an opinion about everything, stopped short when she saw James humming as he prepared pancakes. You look different. Her sharp eyes narrowed. What's going on, always? James hesitated. His mother had been his rock after Lisa's death, helping with Ethan, keeping the household running in those first devastating months. But she'd also been resistant to any suggestion that he might someday move on. She'd loved Lisa like a daughter. I met someone, he kept his tone casual. Her name is Rachel. She's a pediatric nurse. Margaret's expression tightened. A nurse like Lisa. Yes, but different. James flipped a pancake with perhaps more force than necessary. Jenny set us up. She works with her at the hospital. And how many times have you seen this woman? Margaret's voice had taken on the tone she used when questioning students during her years as a high school principal. Just twice. But we're having dinner here tonight. Rachel and her daughter. James met his mother's gaze steadily. I'd like you to meet them. Her daughter. Margaret's eyebrows rose. You're getting involved with a woman who has a child. Sophie is 9. She's a great kid. James felt a flicker of irritation. And yes, Rachel is a single mother. She's divorced. Margaret pressed her lips into a thin line. Isn't it a bit soon for family dinners? You barely know this woman. From the hallway came the sound of Ethan's footsteps. Grandma. His excited voice cut through the tension as he limped into the kitchen, his ankle still tender. Margaret's expression softened as she embraced her grandson. What happened to you? As Ethan launched into a dramatic retelling of his basketball injury, complete with sound effects. James continued preparing breakfast, his thoughts on the evening ahead. He hadn't planned on introducing Rachel to his mother so soon, but maybe it was better this way. Like ripping off a Band-Aid. The day passed in a blur of Sunday routines, homework, supervision, laundry, grading papers for his upcoming classes. By late afternoon, James found himself changing shirts for the third time, scrutinizing his reflection with a critical eye. Why are you so nervous? It's just dinner. Ethan appeared in the doorway, watching his father with amusement. Because you like Rachel already. I'm not nervous, James lied, adjusting his collar. I just want to make a good impression. He ruffled his son's hair. Now go set the table. And be nice to Sophie, okay? Ethan rolled his eyes. I'm always nice, Dad. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. James opened it to find Rachel and Sophie on his doorstep, Rachel holding a homemade chocolate cake and Sophie clutching a drawing pad to her chest. His heart did that strange little flip again at the sight of them. We made dessert, Sophie announced, bouncing slightly on her toes. Mom said it's polite to bring something when you're invited to dinner. It definitely is, James smiled, stepping back to let them in. Thank you, it looks delicious. As they entered the living room, Margaret rose from her seat, her expression carefully neutral. Rachel, this is my mother, Margaret Thompson. Mom, this is Rachel Carson and her daughter Sophie. Margaret's gaze swept over Rachel, taking in her simple sundress and minimal makeup, then moved to Sophie, who stood slightly behind her mother, suddenly shy. It's lovely to meet you. Rachel stepped forward, extending her hand. James has told me so much about you. Has he? Margaret's tone was cool as she shook Rachel's hand briefly. He's told me very little about you. An awkward silence fell, broken only when Ethan appeared from the kitchen. Sophie, he exclaimed, want to see my science project? I'm making a volcano that actually explodes. Sophie's face lit up. She glanced at her mother for permission. Rachel nodded and the two children disappeared down the hallway toward Ethan's room, leaving the adults in a tense triangle of unspoken thoughts. Dinner progressed with the strained politeness of strangers forced into intimacy too soon. Margaret asked pointed questions about Rachel's work, her divorce, her daughter's health, each one feeling more like an interrogation than conversation. James attempted to redirect, to soften, to create bridges, but his mother was in rare form. And Sophie's father, Margaret, asked over dessert, Is he still in the picture, Dad? James's warning tone went unheeded. Rachel set down her fork carefully. Sophie's father left when she was 3, just before her diagnosis. He has a new family in California now. He sends birthday cards. Diagnosis. Margaret frowned. Sophie had leukemia. Rachel's voice remained steady, but James noticed her knuckles whitening around her water glass. She's in remission now, thank goodness. 5 years cancer-free in February. Margaret's expression changed almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry to hear that. She must be a very brave little girl. She is. Rachel's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Every day with her is a gift. From the living room came the sound of children's laughter. Sophie was showing Ethan how to draw a perfect star using connecting lines, a trick she'd learned in art therapy during her long hospital stays. Their heads bent together over the paper, dark and light, their differences momentarily irrelevant in the face of shared curiosity. She looks like you, Margaret observed, watching the children. Same coloring. Rachel nodded. She has her father's eyes, though, and his stubbornness. Ethan is his mother through and through. Margaret's voice softened slightly at the mention of Lisa. Same gentle spirit, same way of seeing the world. He has James's determination. Rachel glanced at James with a small smile, and his kindness. For the first time that evening, Margaret seemed to truly look at Rachel, to see beyond the surface of the woman sitting across from her. Something passed between the two women. Not friendship, not yet, but perhaps recognition. They had loved the same man in different ways at different times. They had both raised children through difficult circumstances. They had both lost and survived. After Margaret left with surprising civility and a promise to call James tomorrow, and after Sophie and Rachel had gone home, James sat on his back porch with a beer, replaying the evening in his mind. It hadn't been the disaster he'd feared, but it hadn't been easy either. His mother was a formidable guardian of Lisa's memory, resistant to change, protective of the family she'd helped rebuild after tragedy. And yet there had been that moment when Rachel spoke of Sophie's illnesses, of counting each day as a gift, when something had shifted. A crack in the armor. A possibility. James's phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about Ethan's volcano. We need to schedule that eruption soon. Followed by a smiley face. He texted back, sorry about my mother, she's protective, but I think she was impressed with you. The reply came quickly. She loves you and Ethan. I respect that. Protective moms understand each other. James smiled in the darkness. Yes, they do. 3 days later, James found himself in the teacher's lounge during his free period, nursing a cup of terrible coffee and grading papers. His colleague, David Chen, dropped into the chair across from him. You look different. David tilted his head, studying James with the intensity of a man who had taught psychology for 20 years. Lighter somehow. New haircut. James deflected, reaching for another essay. No. David shook his head. It's something else. You're present. For the last few years, even when you were here, part of you was always elsewhere. Grief does that. But now, you're back. James set down his red pen, considering his friend's words. Maybe he was right. Since meeting Rachel, something had shifted, not just in how he felt about the possibility of loving again, but in how he moved through the world. Color seemed brighter. Food tasted better. The weight he'd carried for 5 years felt, if not lighter, then at least more evenly distributed. I met someone, he admitted finally. It's complicated. David leaned back, a smile spreading across his face. It always is. But complicated beats empty any day. That evening, Rachel called. Her voice sounded strained, tired in a way he hadn't heard before. Sophie's having a rough day. She's running a low-grade fever, and her joints are aching. It's probably nothing, kids get viruses all the time. But with her history, she didn't need to finish. James understood immediately. The fear that never quite goes away. The shadow that follows remission like an unwelcome companion. What can I do? He asked simply. There was a pause, as if Rachel was surprised by the offer. Or maybe by how easily he understood. Nothing really. I needed to hear a grown-up voice. Sophie's finally sleeping, and the house is too quiet. James settled onto his couch. Ethan already in bed, the house around him similarly still. Tell me about Sophie's first day of kindergarten, he said suddenly. Tell me something happy. Rachel laughed softly, the tension in her voice easing slightly. She wore a yellow dress with butterflies on it, and red rain boots, even though it wasn't raining. She insisted, said they were her brave boots. As Rachel spoke, painting pictures of Sophie through the years, James closed his eyes and listened. He could see the little girl with auburn pigtails and rain boots too big for her feet, could imagine her determination, her spirit so like her mother's. By the time they said goodnight, 2 hours had passed, and Rachel's voice had returned to its usual calm strength. "I needed that," she admitted. "Thank you. Anytime." James meant it. The next day after school, Ethan approached his father with unusual seriousness. "Is Sophie sick again?" His young face creased with worry. James looked up from the papers he was grading at the kitchen table, surprised. "Why do you ask that?" Ethan shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I heard you on the phone last night. You sounded worried. And you said something about doctors." James set down his pen, giving his son his full attention. "Sophie had a virus yesterday. She was feeling pretty bad, but she's better today. Rachel texted me this morning. But she was really sick before, right? Like hospital sick." Ethan persisted. "Yes, she had leukemia when she was younger. That's a type of cancer that affects the blood." James kept his explanation simple but honest, as he always tried to do with Ethan. "But the doctors treated it, and she's been cancer-free for almost 5 years now." Ethan nodded slowly, processing this information. "Is that why she's so small for her age? And why she gets tired sometimes when we play?" James hadn't realized Ethan had noticed these things about Sophie. "Yes, that's part of it. The treatments that saved her life were very strong, and they affected her growth a little bit. But she's healthy now." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful beyond his years. "Mom had cancer too, but she didn't get better." The simple statement hit James like a physical blow. "No, she didn't. Her cancer was different, and it was found later. Sometimes even with the best doctors and treatments, people don't get better." Ethan climbed onto the chair next to his father. "Do you think Mom would like Sophie and Rachel?" The question caught James off guard. He'd wondered the same thing himself many times over the past weeks. Lisa had been compassionate, open-hearted, a pediatric nurse herself before switching to hospice care after Ethan was born. She had loved fiercely, lived fully, even in the face of her diagnosis. "I think she would," James said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Your mom wanted us to be happy, Ethan. She made me promise that we would try to find happiness again someday." Ethan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "Can we invite Sophie and Rachel over this weekend? I want to show Sophie my new telescope." "Dad, she doesn't know any of the constellations." "I have to teach her," James smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "I'll call Rachel tonight." As the weeks passed, a rhythm developed. Weekend outings with both children, dinners at each other's homes, movie nights where Sophie and Ethan built elaborate blanket forts in the living room, late-night conversations on the phone after the children were asleep, texts throughout the day, small observations, shared jokes, pictures of everyday moments. Margaret remained cool but civil, watching the developing relationship with guarded eyes. She was polite to Rachel when their paths crossed, kind to Sophie, but there was a distance. She maintained a silent reminder that Lisa had been her daughter in all but blood, and her place in their family wasn't so easily filled. It was during a simple Saturday afternoon at the park, watching Ethan teach Sophie how to properly throw a frisbee, that Rachel finally broached the subject. "Your mother doesn't approve of me." It wasn't a question. James sighed, watching the children rather than meeting Rachel's eyes. "It's not you specifically. It would be the same with anyone. Lisa was special to her, to all of us." "I know." Rachel's voice was gentle. "I would never try to replace her, James. That's not possible, and it's not what any of us need." James turned to her, then struck by the simple wisdom of her words. "What do we need?" he asked quietly. Rachel considered this, watching as Sophie caught the frisbee with a triumphant whoop. "To honor what was, to embrace what is, to be open to what might be." Something loosened in James' chest at her words, a tightness he hadn't fully acknowledged until it began to ease. She understood. Of course she did. Rachel, who had faced the possible loss of her child, who had rebuilt a life for them both after her husband walked away, who knew what it meant to carry grief and hope side by side. That night, after dropping Rachel and Sophie at their apartment, James found himself driving to the cemetery instead of home. He hadn't visited Lisa's grave in months, a fact that sometimes filled him with guilt. In the early years after her death, he had come weekly, bringing fresh flowers, talking to her about Ethan's growth, the challenges of single parenthood, the emptiness of the house without her laughter. The visits had gradually become less frequent as the raw wound of grief scarred over. Not forgotten, never that, but less agonizing to touch. The cemetery was quiet in the gathering dusk, the autumn air crisp with the promise of the first frost. James made his way to the familiar spot, a simple headstone under a maple tree that blazed with color in the fading light. Lisa Thompson, beloved wife, mother-daughter healer, always in our hearts. James stood for a long moment, hands in his pockets, not speaking. What was there to say? That he was beginning to feel again after years of numbness, that a woman with auburn hair and steady hands was teaching him that his heart hadn't died with Lisa, after all, that their son was thriving, growing into a boy who asked thoughtful questions and built volcanoes that actually exploded. "I think you'd like her," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "She's not you. No one could be, but she's her own kind of wonderful." A breeze stirred the maple leaves, sending a shower of red and gold around him. James closed his eyes, feeling the touch of the leaves against his face like gentle fingers. For a moment, just a moment, he could almost hear Lisa's voice. "Live, James. Love. That's all I ever wanted for you." When he returned home, he found a text from Rachel. "Sophie insists on making a constellation chart for Ethan. We may need another astronomy lesson. Soon." James smiled, typing back, "Name the day. The stars aren't going anywhere." As October gave way to November, Sophie's regular checkup at the oncology clinic approached. Rachel mentioned it casually one evening while they were washing dishes after dinner, but James caught the undercurrent of tension in her voice. "It's routine," she said, scrubbing a pot with perhaps more force than necessary. "Just blood work and a physical exam. She has them every 6 months now instead of every 3. That's progress." "Would you like me to come with you?" James asked, carefully drying a wine glass. Rachel's hands stilled in the soapy water. "You don't have to do that. It's a school day. I know you have classes. I have planning periods. And substitutes exist for a reason." James set down the glass. "Unless you'd rather go alone. I understand if that's your private time with Sophie." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the kitchen window. "All these years, it's just been me, in those waiting rooms, holding her hand during blood draws, trying not to let her see my fear while we wait for results, being strong for both of us." She turned to James, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, I'd like you to come, if you're sure." "I'm sure." James reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You're not alone anymore, Rachel." The appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. James arranged for a substitute teacher and met Rachel in the hospital parking lot at 9 o'clock sharp. Sophie bounced out of the car, seemingly unfazed by the purpose of their visit. "Mr. James, did my mom tell you I got an A on my science project? The one about the water cycle. Ethan helped me with the diagram part." "She did tell me." James smiled, falling into step beside them as they headed toward the hospital entrance. "I heard it was the best one in the class." Sophie nodded emphatically. "Ms. Peterson said my cloud formations were exceptionally accurate. That means really, really good." Rachel watched their interaction, a small smile playing at her lips, despite the anxiety James knew she must be feeling. Sophie had always been this way before appointments, extra talkative, extra enthusiastic, as if trying to convince the world, and perhaps herself, that she was perfectly fine, a normal kid with normal concerns. The pediatric oncology wing was decorated with bright murals and child-sized furniture, an attempt to soften the clinical reality of the place. Several nurses greeted Sophie by name as they passed, and she waved back with the familiarity of a longtime visitor. In the waiting room, Sophie immediately gravitated toward a little boy about 5 years old who was building a tower with wooden blocks. With a questioning glance at her mother, who nodded permission, Sophie knelt beside him and began to help. "She's good with the younger ones," Rachel murmured, watching her daughter. "She remembers what it was like. Being scared, not understanding everything that was happening. She likes to be the big kid now, showing them it's okay." James watched as Sophie patiently helped the little boy balance a block on top of their growing tower, her movements gentle, her voice encouraging. A glimpse perhaps of the young woman she would become, compassionate, resilient, shaped but not defined by her early battles. The checkup itself was straightforward. Blood drawn by a nurse with butterfly stickers on her badge, height and weight recorded. A physical examination by an oncologist with kind eyes and a bow tie covered in tiny dinosaurs. Sophie chatted throughout, only falling silent during the blood draw when she squeezed her mother's hand tightly and bit her lip. The doctor was reassuring. "Everything looks good, Sophie. You're growing well and your physical exam is perfect. We'll have the blood results in a day or two, but I don't expect any concerns." As they left the hospital, Sophie skipping ahead to the parking lot, James noticed Rachel's shoulders finally relax, tension draining from her body like water. "This is the hard part," she said quietly. "The waiting. Even after all this time, even with every checkup coming back clear, I still hold my breath until we get those results." James reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We'll wait together." Rachel's smile was small but genuine. Together. I like the sound of that. 2 days later, the call came while Rachel was at work. "All clear, all markers normal. See you in 6 months." That night, they celebrated with ice cream sundaes and a movie of Sophie's choosing. As the children argued good-naturedly over toppings and flavor combinations, James watched Rachel. The shadows that had lingered in her eyes since the appointment were gone, replaced by a lightness, a presence in the moment that had been missing. Later, after Sophie and Ethan had fallen asleep on opposite ends of the couch during the movie, a rare moment of stillness for both Rachel and James sat on the back porch of his house, a glass of wine shared between them. When Sophie was first diagnosed, Rachel began, her voice soft in the darkness. "The doctors told me to take it one day at a time. Just focus on getting through today, then tomorrow, then the next day. Don't think too far ahead." It was good advice for surviving that time. She turned to look at James, her profile illuminated by the porch light. "But I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to live, to plan, to dream beyond the next 6-month checkup." "What do you dream about?" James asked, his voice equally soft. Rachel was quiet for a moment, considering. "A home that's ours, not just mine or yours, but belonging to all of us. A place where Sophie can paint her room whatever color she wants because we're not renting. Where Ethan can build that telescope observatory he's always talking about." James smiled at the mention of his son's latest obsession. "He's drawn up detailed plans, complete with rotating dome and computer tracking system." "Of course he has." Rachel laughed softly. "He's nothing if not thorough. Like his mother," James said without thinking. A comfortable silence fell between them. It was the first time James had compared Ethan to Lisa in Rachel's presence. Not an avoidance of the past, but an acknowledgement of it, a natural weaving of what had been into what was becoming. "Tell me more about Lisa," Rachel said finally. "Not the illness part, the living part. What made her laugh? What drove her crazy? What did she love besides you and Ethan?" James leaned back in his chair, looking up at the stars Ethan had taught him to name. "She loved thunderstorms. Would sit on this very porch and count the seconds between lightning and thunder. Had a terrible singing voice but didn't care, belted out songs in the shower in the car. Couldn't cook to save her life." His voice grew wistful with memory. "She cried at commercials with puppies, hated tight spaces, collected vintage medical instruments. Weird, I know, but she found them fascinating. The history of healing." Rachel listened, her expression open, without jealousy or discomfort. She wasn't threatened by these memories. She welcomed them, understood their importance in the tapestry of who James and Ethan were. "She sounds wonderful," Rachel said, when James finally fell silent. "No wonder Margaret guards her memory so fiercely." James nodded, grateful for Rachel's understanding. "She was. And yes, that's why my mother is the way she is. Lisa was the daughter she never had. When we lost her, Mom lost a child too." Rachel set her empty wine glass on the small table between them. What would help her see that loving me doesn't mean losing Lisa? The question hung in the air between them both, an acknowledgement of the growing depth of their relationship and a practical concern about the woman who remained a steady, if complicated, presence in their lives. "Time, maybe," James said finally, "and seeing that I can hold both in my heart, that we all can." Inside, Sophie stirred on the couch, murmuring something in her sleep. Ethan, already awake, carefully adjusted the blanket around her shoulders before looking up to see his father watching through the window. The boy smiled, a small, private smile that spoke volumes about his growing affection for the little girl who had unexpectedly become a part of his life. "Look." James nodded toward the window. "Maybe it's already happening." Over the next few weeks, Margaret's resistance began to thaw, almost imperceptibly at first. She still made occasional references to Lisa, and Rachel's presence still maintained a certain reserve. But there were moments when Sophie helped her roll out pie crust for Thanksgiving, when Rachel remembered that Margaret took her coffee black with one sugar, when both women laughed at the same dry joke, when the possibility of understanding even friendship seemed less remote. The children, meanwhile, had formed a bond that surprised even their parents. Despite being a year younger, Sophie had taken on the role of protective older sister, fiercely defending Ethan when a neighborhood boy made fun of his interest in astronomy. Ethan, in turn, had appointed himself Sophie's math tutor, patiently explaining fractions at the kitchen table while she groaned dramatically. "That's not how my teacher does it," Sophie complained one afternoon, pushing away her homework. "But this way makes more sense." Ethan insisted, pushing it back toward her. "Look, if you think about pizza slices instead of numbers." "I hate fractions," Sophie declared. "And I'm not very hungry, so pizza doesn't help." James, grading papers nearby, hid a smile. The children bickered like siblings already comfortable enough with each other to express frustration, to disagree, to push boundaries. It was, in its way, as much a sign of their growing closeness as the moments of shared laughter and twin mischief. "They're good together." Rachel said later that evening, after Sophie had finally conquered her fraction homework, and both children had retreated to the living room to watch a documentary about space. "Ethan's patience, Sophie's spirit. They balance each other." James nodded, watching the easy way the children shared the bowl of popcorn between them. How Sophie rested her head against Ethan's shoulder when she grew tired. How naturally he shifted to make room for her. "He hasn't been this happy in a long time," James said quietly. "Neither have I." Rachel's eyes met his, warmth and understanding flowing between them. The conversation they'd been circling for weeks, months, even hung in the air, unspoken but present. The future. Possibilities. Next steps. "I've been thinking," James began, his heart pounding. "That sounds dangerous," Rachel teased, but her eyes were serious. "Our lease renewals are both coming up next month, and I was wondering if you and Sophie might want to make this arrangement more permanent." Rachel set down her wine glass carefully. "Are you asking us to move in with you?" "I'm asking if we could find a new place together," James clarified. "Somewhere with enough room for all of us, maybe a yard for a dog. Ethan's been asking for one for years." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "James Walker," she said slowly, "are you creating a family with me?" "I think we already are a family," James replied, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "I'm just suggesting we make it official." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "There's something I need to tell you first. Something I should have told you months ago." James felt a chill of apprehension. "What is it?" "Sophie's leukemia. There's a 15% chance of recurrence." Rachel couldn't finish, emotion clogging her throat. James took her hands in his. "Rachel, listen to me. When Lisa got sick, I learned that none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. All we can do is love each other today with everything we have. And if it comes back," Rachel whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear, "then we'll face it together, all four of us." James squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not afraid of loving Sophie, Rachel, or of loving you. I'm only afraid of missing the chance to do it fully, completely, for however long we have." Rachel looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of hesitation or doubt. Finding none, she leaned forward and kissed him a kiss full of promise and possibility, of shared strength and newfound hope. That weekend, they began looking at houses, four-bedroom homes with backyards, finished basements for rainy day activities, kitchens with islands where the family could gather for meals and homework and life's small, precious moments. The children came along excitedly, claiming imaginary bedrooms and debating the merits of various neighborhoods based on proximity to parks and schools. James watched as Ethan showed Sophie the constellations they would be able to see from a particular backyard, his hands gesturing enthusiastically as he mapped the night sky for her. Sophie listened with rapt attention, asking questions that revealed she'd been learning the star names Ethan had taught her, storing away this knowledge that mattered to him. In that moment, under a December sky, with snow threatening in the heavy clouds, James felt a profound sense of rightness. This unexpected family, forged through chance and choice, through the invisible connection of shared cells and the visible bonds of shared days, was real. Imperfect, still forming, carrying the shadows of past pain, but real and whole in a way he had never thought possible again. Later that night, after dropping Rachel and Sophie at their apartment with plans to meet the realtor again tomorrow, Midas found Ethan sitting on his bed holding the framed photograph of Lisa that had stood on his nightstand since her death. "Dad," his voice was hesitant, "if we move to a new house with Rachel and Sophie, can Mom come too?" James sat beside his son, the bed dipping under their combined weight. "What do you mean, buddy?" Ethan traced Lisa's smile with his finger. "This picture, and the others of Mom. Will they come to the new house? I don't want to forget what she looked like." James put his arm around Ethan's shoulders, pulling him close. "Of course they will. Your mom will always be part of our family, Ethan. Moving to a new house with Rachel and Sophie doesn't change that. It just means our family is growing." Ethan nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. "Do you think Mom would like our new family?" James considered the question carefully, wanting to be honest with his son while honoring both past and present. "I do," he said finally. "Your mom wanted us to be happy more than anything in the world. She made me promise to try. And Rachel and Sophie make us happy, don't they?" Ethan nodded again, more vigorously this time. "Sophie's going to be like my sister. I always wanted a sister." "Well, she's going to be your stepsister, technically," James explained. "When Rachel and I get married someday." Ethan looked up at his father with a knowing smile. "Are you going to marry Rachel, Dad?" James felt a rush of warmth at the simple, direct question. "I hope so. Someday. If she'll have me." "She will," Ethan said with the certainty of a child. "She looks at you the way Mom used to, like you're her favorite person." James hugged his son tighter, throat tight, with emotion. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart, Dad." Ethan rolled his eyes. "I'm just saying what I see." That night, James dreamed of Lisa. Not the thin, pale Lisa of the hospital room, but the vibrant woman he'd fallen in love with, laughing as she chased a toddler Ethan through a sprinkler, her dark hair wet and gleaming in the sun. In the dream, she stopped and looked directly at him, her smile warm and real. "It's time, James." Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. Time to fully live again. He woke with tears on his cheeks, but a lightness in his heart that had been missing for years. Outside, the first snow of winter was falling, covering the world in pristine white, a blank page waiting for new stories to be written. 3 months after their first meeting, spring arrived in earnest, painting the world in vivid greens and blooming colors that mirrored the flourishing connection between their families. The routine they'd established felt both comfortable and exhilarating: weekend outings to museums and parks, weeknight dinners rotating between their homes, quiet evenings after the children were asleep, when James and Rachel would talk for hours, discovering new layers of each other with each conversation. Today they'd gathered at the local botanical gardens, Sophie running ahead on the stone pathway, pointing out every flower she recognized, while Ethan followed with his new camera, documenting specimens for his science project. Rachel watched them with a smile that reached her eyes, the tension that had been her constant companion during Sophie's illness, now appearing only during medical checkups, or the rare nights when Sophie complained of mysterious aches. James walked beside her, their hands occasionally brushing a subtle form of contact they'd grown accustomed to, both aware of the children's watchful eyes and the delicate balance they maintained. Neither rushed, neither pushed, both recognizing the precious, fragile nature of what they were building together. Ethan knelt beside a cluster of purple coneflowers, adjusting his camera angle. Sophie crouched next to him, her auburn hair catching the sunlight as she pointed to something James couldn't see from this distance. The easy camaraderie between them still surprised him sometimes, how quickly they'd move from awkward introductions to comfortable companionship, developing inside jokes and shared interests that sometimes excluded the adults entirely. Rachel's phone rang, the hospital's distinctive tone causing her smile to falter momentarily. A colleague needing a shift covered nothing urgent, but James noticed the instinctive tightening of her shoulders at the sounds, the automatic preparation for bad news that had become second nature during Sophie's illness. Even now, years into remission, some reflexes remained. "I'm sorry, I need to take this." Rachel stepped away, her voice shifting into professional mode as she discussed schedules and patients with her colleague. Ethan approached his father, camera hanging around his neck, expression uncharacteristically serious. "Dad, when are you going to ask Rachel to be your girlfriend?" "Like officially, I know you like her. It's really obvious." James blinked, caught off guard by his son's directness. The conversation he'd been planning to have with Ethan suddenly flipping the child taking the initiative, as he so often did these days. We've been spending time together as friends getting to know each other. It's complicated when you have children to consider. Ethan rolled his eyes with the magnificent disdain only a 10-year-old could muster. Adults always say things are complicated when they're scared. That's what Grandma says. The mention of Margaret brought a wry smile to James' face. His mother had been uncharacteristically insightful about his hesitation, even while maintaining her own reservations about Rachel. During their weekly lunch the previous day, she'd fixed him with a penetrating stare over her cup of tea. "You're waiting for permission, James, from Lisa, from Ethan, from me, but the only permission you need is your own." Looking at his son now, James saw not just Lisa's eyes, but her forthright manner, her refusal to dance around difficult truths. "When did you get so wise about relationships?" "I watch a lot of TV." Ethan shrugged, then grew serious again. "Dad, I like Rachel, and Sophie's like the sister I always wanted. I know Mom isn't coming back." His voice caught slightly, but he continued, "It's okay to be happy again. I want you to be happy." James felt a tightness in his throat that overwhelmed by his son's emotional generosity. Before he could respond, Rachel returned, slipping her phone into her pocket with an apologetic smile. "Everything okay at work?" "Just schedule changes." Rachel's eyes moved between father and son, sensing the emotional current between them. "Did I interrupt something important?" Ethan grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Just telling Dad he should ask you out on a real date, without us kids, a grown-up date." Rachel's eyebrows rose, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "Well, that's direct. He gets that from his mother." James smiled, grateful for the momentary lightening of the moment. "But he's not wrong. Would you like to have dinner with me, Rachel? Just the two of us?" Her smile bloomed slowly, genuinely. "I'd like that very much." Sophie bounded back to them, wildflower crown askew on her head and oblivious to the moment she'd interrupted. "Mom, Ethan's going to show me how to develop photos in a darkroom. His science teacher has one at school and said we could use it if we're careful with the chemicals. Can I go?" Please, the moment shifted, parental logistics taking precedence over budding romance, a pattern they'd grown accustomed to over the months. As they discussed permission slips and scheduling, James caught Rachel's eye over Sophie's head, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The conversation would continue. The step would be taken. But first, as always, the children. The following Saturday, Margaret arrived at James' house promptly at 5, a tote bag filled with books and activities for the evening. Her silver hair was perfectly styled as always, her posture straight as she surveyed the living room with the critical eye of a former school principal. "I've brought healthy snacks." She set the bag on the coffee table. "And that astronomy documentary Ethan's been wanting to watch." "Where is my grandson?" James adjusted his tie, the first time he'd worn one since parent-teacher conferences months ago. "Upstairs changing his shirt. Sophie spilled juice on him about 10 minutes ago. They've been playing some elaborate card game she invented." Margaret's expression tightened slightly at the mention of Sophie. "That child is here already. I thought I was picking her up with Rachel. They came early to help me get ready." James kept his tone light but firm. "Sophie picked out this tie, actually. Said it brings out my eyes." Margaret made a non-committal sound, hanging her light jacket in the closet with precise movements. "Rachel is special to you." It wasn't quite a question. James met his mother's gaze steadily. "Yes, she is." A moment of understanding passed between them, not acceptance, not yet, but acknowledgement. Margaret nodded once, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Then I hope you have a lovely evening, and don't worry about the children." "We'll be fine." The sound of footsteps thundering down the stairs announced Ethan and Sophie, both breathless with excitement. Grandma Sophie made up a card game with mythology characters. "It's really cool. You should play with us." Margaret allowed a small smile as Ethan hugged her. "Perhaps after dinner. I understand someone needs to wash up first." Sophie looked down at her hands, stained blue and red from the markers she'd been using to create her cards. "Oops," she glanced up at Margaret with a hesitant smile. "I get carried away with art sometimes. Creative enthusiasm is nothing to apologize for." Margaret's tone was gentler than James had expected, though clean hands for dinner is still non-negotiable. Sophie grinned, revealing the gap where she'd recently lost a tooth. "Yes, ma'am." She darted toward the bathroom, pigtails bouncing. James watched his mother's interaction with Sophie with cautious optimism. There had been subtle shifts over the months, Margaret asking about Sophie's latest checkup, remembering her favorite ice cream flavor, acknowledging her academic achievements with the same pride she showed for Ethan's. Small things, but meaningful. Rachel arrived 15 minutes later, wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes appear even more vivid than usual. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, rather than in the practical ponytail she typically wore for hospital shifts or outings with the children. James felt his breath catch at the sight of her. Not just her physical beauty, but the fullness of who she was, the life she'd built, the strength that radiated from her even in moments of vulnerability. The children made exaggerated kissing sounds when James told Rachel she looked beautiful, dissolving into giggles until Margaret silenced them with a single raised eyebrow, a skill James had never mastered despite years of teaching. They'll be fine. They'll be. Rachel squeezed his hand as they walked to the car, sensing his hesitation at leaving Sophie. Between your mother's discipline and Ethan's protectiveness, Sophie couldn't be in better hands. The restaurant James had chosen was an intimate Italian place downtown with private booths and soft lighting that created the illusion of solitude even in a crowded room. Over wine and pasta, they discovered the luxury of uninterrupted adult conversation. No small hands tugging at sleeves, no negotiations over vegetables, no need to monitor appropriate topics. They spoke of their childhoods, college years early, careers filling in the gaps of their histories that had been shared only in fragments between parenting moments. I was engaged once before Lisa. James twirled pasta around his fork, the confession easier in the warm, safe space they'd created. In college. It ended badly. She found someone else during a semester abroad. I was devastated at the time, convinced I'd never trust anyone again. Rachel smiled, understanding in her eyes. And then you met Lisa 6 months later, at a hospital fundraiser my mother dragged me to. James smiled at the memory. Lisa was volunteering, serving terrible punch with this apologetic smile. She spilled some on my shoe and was so mortified she offered to buy me coffee to make up for it. We were married 14 months later. Rachel reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Thank you for telling me about her, for sharing those memories. I know it can't be easy. Actually, it is. That's what surprises me. James met her gaze. Talking about Lisa with you feels right, like she's part of this story too, in her way. She is. Rachel's voice was soft but certain. Just like Kevin is part of mine, even though our ending was very different. James raised an eyebrow, encouraging her to continue. They had spoken of Sophie's father only in passing, the bare facts of his departure, his new family in California, his sporadic contact with his daughter. Rachel sipped her wine, gathering her thoughts. We were high school sweethearts. Married at 22, way too young. Had Sophie at 26. The relationship was already strained, but we were trying. Then came Sophie's diagnosis at 3, and he just crumbled. Couldn't handle the hospital visits, the uncertainty, the possibility of losing her. 6 months into her treatment, he took a job transfer to California. Said he needed space to process. She made air quotes, a rare flash of bitterness in her usually understanding demeanor. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later. James felt a surge of anger at this man he'd never met, who had left Rachel to face their child's illness alone. But beneath the anger was profound gratitude that she had been strong enough to become the woman sitting across from him now. Compassionate, resilient, open to love despite past wounds. Their first kiss happened in the restaurant parking lot, both of them laughing afterward at the teenage awkwardness of it, leaning across the center console. Her seatbelt still fastened, his glasses fogging slightly in the cool spring air. The second kiss at her apartment door lingered longer, deepened, conveying months of restrained feeling, finally given permission to express itself. Rachel pressed her forehead against his, both of them breathless. I should go inside. Early shift tomorrow. James nodded reluctantly, stepping back. That was worth the wait. Rachel smiled, her hand still resting on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. Yes, it was. Their relationship shifted after that night, not dramatically but perceptibly. Hands held openly rather than in furtive touches. Casual kisses, hello and goodbye. Arms around waists while watching the children play. The physical expressions of what had been growing between them for months now acknowledged, integrated into their evolving family dynamic. The children accepted these changes with the adaptability of youth. Ethan seemed pleased with himself for his role in pushing his father forward. Sophie, who had never seen her mother in a relationship besides fleeting memories of her father, was initially more watchful, studying their interactions with solemn eyes, before apparently deciding this development met with her approval. Margaret's acceptance came more gradually, revealed in small gestures rather than words. Inviting Rachel for coffee while the children were at school, sharing her recipe for apple strudel that had been Lisa's favorite, asking Rachel's professional opinion about a friend's medical situation, building bridges one careful plank at a time. It was during a weekend at Margaret's lakeside cottage in early June that James realized how seamlessly their lives had interwoven. Watching Rachel and his mother working side by side in the kitchen, Ethan and Sophie splashing in the shallows under Margaret's watchful eye, he felt a sense of rightness that both honored his past and embraced his present. Later that evening, after the children were asleep in the cottage's small second bedroom, the three adults sat on the screened porch listening to the chorus of cicadas and watching fireflies rise from the tall grass near the shore. Lisa loved this place. Margaret's voice was soft, reflective, rather than accusatory. We came here every summer when she was growing up. When she brought you here the first time, James, I knew she'd found the right man. You looked at this cottage, this modest little place, and saw what she saw in it. The peace, the connection to something larger than ourselves. Rachel was quiet, giving Margaret space to share these memories. She'd learned that Margaret's reminiscences weren't meant to exclude her, but to incorporate her into their family history to help her understand the foundations upon which their present was built. Margaret turned to Rachel, her expression gentle in the dim porch light. I see that same recognition in you. When you watch the children exploring the lake's edge, when you notice the heron that visits every morning, you understand what makes this place special. Rachel's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, recognizing the gift in Margaret's words. Thank you for sharing it with us. Margaret reached over briefly, covering Rachel's hand with her own, a gesture more eloquent than any words of acceptance she could have offered. James felt his throat tighten with emotion, grateful for these two strong women who had shaped his life in such different but equally profound ways. The peaceful interlude at the lake sharpened the contrast when they returned to daily life and its challenges. Ethan began having trouble at school, his grades slipping, his typically enthusiastic participation replaced by distraction and occasional defiance. His teacher called, concerned about the change in behavior, suggesting it might be related to the evolving family dynamics at home. James found Ethan in his room that evening, sitting on the floor surrounded by photographs spread in a haphazard collage around him. Images of Lisa smiling at the camera, holding baby Ethan, teaching in her classroom, lounging on the couch with a book. Memories captured and preserved, now spilling across the carpet like puzzle pieces. What's going on, buddy? James sat cross-legged beside his son, careful not to disturb the photographs. Ethan continued sorting images, not meeting his father's eyes. I'm afraid I'll forget her. When we move to the new house with Rachel and Sophie, when everything changes. James felt the familiar ache whenever Lisa was discussed, but it was dulled now by time and healing a phantom pain rather than the sharp agony of fresh grief. We're not going to forget her, Ethan. She'll always be part of our family, but it won't be the same. Ethan's voice cracked, and I feel bad because I like Rachel and Sophie. I want them to live with us. But does that mean I'm forgetting Mom? Am I being disloyal? James gathered his son into his arms, this boy on the cusp of adolescence, who still sometimes needed the simple comfort of a father's embrace. Loving Rachel and Sophie doesn't mean loving Mom less. Our hearts don't work that way. They expand, grow bigger to include more people. Ethan sniffled against his shoulder, his small body trembling with emotion he'd been holding back for weeks. I found this under my bed. He pulled away slightly, reaching for a cardboard box half hidden beneath his nightstand. It was a memory box Lisa had created during her illness, filled with letters for Ethan's future birthdays, small gifts to be opened at milestone moments, photographs and mementos she'd selected, knowing she wouldn't be there to share them in person. James recognized it immediately, his heart clenching. Where did you find this? I've been looking for it for years. I thought it might have been accidentally donated during one of our moves. Ethan wiped his nose with his sleeve. I hid it after Mom died. I was scared you'd want to look at everything inside, and I wanted it to be just mine. But now, he hesitated, a vulnerability written across his young face. Maybe we could look at it together, and maybe someday I could show some of it to Sophie. So she knows who Mom was? James pulled his son close again, tears falling freely now. I think Mom would like that very much. Later that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, surrounded by photographs and memories, James called Rachel. The conversation was long, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared understanding. She listened as he described finding the memory box, Ethan's fears, the bittersweet process of rediscovering Lisa's final gifts to her son. I know we've been talking about looking for houses moving in together. Rachel's voice was gentle through the phone. But maybe we should slow down. Give Ethan more time to process everything. James considered her suggestion, grateful for her sensitivity, but aware that delay wouldn't necessarily make the transition easier. Actually, I think this might have been exactly what Ethan needed, to express his fears, to connect with Lisa's memory in a tangible way, to understand that she'll always be with us no matter where we live or how our family changes. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Are you sure I don't want to rush anything, especially if Ethan's struggling? I'm sure he is. James felt the certainty settle in his chest, warm and solid. What Ethan showed me tonight wasn't resistance to our future. It was a need to bring his past with him, to integrate these parts of his life rather than compartmentalizing them. Across town in her small apartment, Rachel sat on her balcony watching the city lights, phone pressed to her ear, feeling the distance between them, and yet the incredible closeness that had developed over these months. Sophie's been asking questions about Kevin lately, more specific ones about why he left, whether it had anything to do with her being sick. I think she's trying to make sense of her own story too. What did you tell her? James asked. The truth, that her father loved her but couldn't handle the fear of losing her, that his leaving had everything to do with his weakness and nothing to do with her, that some people run from difficult things while others stay and fight. She paused, the memory of those dark days still painful. I told her that while I wish he had been stronger for her sake, his leaving taught me how strong I could be. And that strength eventually led us to you and Ethan. The simple truth of her words hung between them, how pain and loss had ultimately created the path that brought them together. Not in a way that erased the hurt or justified it, but in the mysterious way life sometimes creates beauty from broken pieces. The house hunt resumed with renewed purpose, all four of them approaching it with clearer understanding of what they were creating together. They found it on a Sunday afternoon in late June, a Victorian with good bones but outdated interiors. 4 bedrooms, a sprawling backyard with mature oak trees and a detached garage James immediately envisioned converting into Ethan's astronomy observatory. The neighborhood was established with sidewalks perfect for bike riding and a community pool within walking distance. As they wandered through the empty rooms, their footsteps echoing on hardwood floors, the children claimed spaces with the confident certainty of youth. Sophie spun in circles in a corner bedroom with bay windows and built-in bookshelves. Ethan measured the distance between ceiling and floor in what would become his room, already calculating the optimal placement for the glow-in-the-dark star map he'd been designing. Rachel stood in the center of the master bedroom, sunlight streaming through tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. James watched her from the doorway, struck by the tableau. This woman who had become the center of his world, standing in what would become their shared space, her expression thoughtful as she envisioned their future. I can picture us here. She turned to him, eyes bright with possibility. All of us, building something new. James crossed the room to her, taking both her hands in his. So can I. The offer was accepted the following day, setting in motion a whirlwind of paperwork, inspections, and planning. Their lease renewals approaching, they decided to move directly into the new house rather than extending either of their current arrangements. The timeline was tight but manageable, assuming no complications arose, which of course they did. Sophie's routine 6-month checkup coincided with the final week before closing. A typically straightforward appointment suddenly became concerning when her blood work showed anomalies that required additional testing. Nothing definitive, the doctor assured them, but enough to warrant further investigation. The shadow they had lived with for years, held at bay by clean scans and normal tests, suddenly loomed larger. Rachel maintained her composure in the doctor's office, asking precise questions with professional detachment. It was only later, in the privacy of her apartment after Sophie was asleep, that she allowed herself to crumble. James holding her as sobs racked her body, the accumulated fear of years breaking through her carefully constructed strength. What if it's back? Her voice was raw, muffled against his chest. What if after all this time, all these clear scans, it's starting again? James stroked her hair, his own fear a cold weight in his stomach. Then we'll face it, together. One day at a time, just like before. Except this time, you're not alone. Rachel pulled back slightly, her face tear-streaked but resolute. But you didn't sign up for this, James, you and Ethan. This possibility has always been there for me, this sword hanging over our lives. But you had a choice. You still do. James cupped her face between his hands, his gaze unwavering. Do you remember what I told you when we first discussed moving in together? When Lisa got sick, I learned that none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. All we can do is love each other today with everything we have. That hasn't changed, Rachel. Not for me. She searched his face, looking for any hint of hesitation or doubt. Finding none, she nodded slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. Okay, together then. They decided not to tell the children about the concerning test results until they had more information. Sophie, sensitive to her mother's moods after years of hospital visits, noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere, but attributed it to moving stress when gently questioned. Ethan, absorbed in packing his possessions and planning his new room, remained blissfully unaware of the adults' concern. The additional tests were scheduled for the following week after the closing during the chaotic first days in their new home. Rachel suggested postponing the move until they had answers, but James disagreed. We move forward with our plans. We live our lives. We don't put everything on hold for fear of what might happen. Margaret, informed of the situation during a quiet conversation on her porch, surprised James with her immediate unwavering support. Lisa would be proud of the man you've become. Her eyes, so like his own, held a lifetime of wisdom. She would want this for you, this family you are building, this love you have found, even with its uncertainties. The closing proceeded without complications, the keys to their new home handed over on a brilliantly sunny July morning that felt like a good omen despite the shadow of uncertainty hanging over them. The moving trucks arrived, disgorging furniture and boxes into the empty rooms that would soon hold their combined lives. Friends helped, forming a bucket brigade to transport smaller items, while professionals handled the heavier pieces. By evening, the essential spaces were functional, if not fully organized beds, assembled kitchen. Basics unpacked, shower curtains hung. They ordered pizza, the four of them sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by boxes labeled in different handwriting styles, eating from paper plates and drinking from plastic cups that hadn't yet found their proper cupboards. Look at us, Sophie waved her pizza slice, expansively tomato sauce dotting her chin. A real family in our real house. Ethan nodded solemnly, the weight of the moment not lost on him despite his youth. A forever home. Rachel caught James' eye over the children's heads, a silent communication passing between them, hope tempered by the knowledge of what the coming days might bring, joy in the present moment, regardless of future uncertainties. That night, after the children were asleep in their new rooms, Ethan surrounded by telescopes and space posters, Sophie curled beneath a canopy bed Margaret had unexpectedly gifted her. James and Rachel stood on the back porch of their new home, hands entwined as they surveyed the moonlit yard. Whatever happens with the tests, this was the right decision. Rachel leaned against him, her body fitting perfectly against his side. Being here, being together. James pressed a kiss to her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Every time. 3 days later, they sat in another doctor's office, holding hands so tightly their fingers ached as the oncologist reviewed the latest test results. The room was painted in soothing blues and decorated with children's artwork, but nothing could soften the knife's edge of waiting, of watching the doctor's face for any hint of the news to come. The results are clear. No evidence of recurrence. The initial abnormality appears to have been a lab error, or possibly related to a mild virus Sophie was fighting off. We'll want to repeat the test in 3 months rather than 6, just to be thorough, but there's no cause for concern based on these findings. The relief was so profound that Rachel actually swayed in her seat, James's arm immediately circling her shoulders to steady her. Thank you, doctor. Her voice was barely audible, years of held breath finally released in those 3 words. That evening they celebrated not with anything elaborate, but with ice cream sundaes assembled at the kitchen island that was rapidly becoming the heart of their new home. Sophie, unaware of the bullet they dodged, was simply excited about the unexpected treat on a weeknight, creating a towering masterpiece of chocolate and caramel that threatened to topple with each additional topping. Ethan, who had been told a simplified version of the situation that morning, watched Rachel with newfound appreciation. He'd known abstractly about Sophie's illness, about Rachel's years as both mother and medical advocate, but seeing the relief in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she scooped ice cream gave him a more concrete understanding of what they had faced and might face again someday. Later, after the sticky bowls were washed and the children were engrossed in setting up the new gaming system in the family room, James found Rachel in their bedroom, sitting on the edge of the still unmade bed, staring at the photograph she kept on her nightstand. Sophie in a hospital bed, bald from chemotherapy, grinning broadly as she held up a crayon drawing of a rainbow. "I keep this to remind me." Her voice was soft as James sat beside her, not of the fear or the pain, but of how brave she was, how much stronger than I ever thought possible. She was so small, James, so small to fight something so big. James wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her against him, just like her mother. Rachel laughed softly, leaning into his embrace. When Sophie was first diagnosed, Rachel began, her voice gentle in the quiet of their new bedroom. "The doctors told me to take it one day at a time. Just focus on getting through today, then tomorrow, then the next day. Don't think too far ahead." It was good advice for surviving that time. She turned to face him fully, her expression serious but peaceful. "But I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to live, to plan, to dream beyond the next checkup or the next scare. And that's what you've given us, James. Permission to look forward, to believe in a future." James brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "You gave that to yourself, Rachel, long before I came along. I'm just lucky enough to be part of the journey now." She kissed him, then a kiss that spoke of shared understanding, of gratitude for the present moment, of commitment to the path ahead, whatever it might hold. Downstairs, the children's laughter floated up the stairwell, the sound of their new family finding its voice in their new home. Tomorrow would bring more unpacking, more arranging, more blending of their separate lives into one shared story. There would be arguments over bathroom schedules and negotiations about chore distribution. There would be adjustments and compromises, moments of friction, as four individuals learned to function as a unit. But for tonight, in this moment, there was simply gratitude for second chances, for unexpected connections, for the mysterious ways life sometimes circles back to offer healing where there was once only pain. 1 year after that fateful day, when Rachel had appeared on James's doorstep, the Victorian house had transformed from an empty shell of possibilities into a living, breathing home. The walls, once bare and echoing, now displayed a carefully curated blend of their previous lives. Lisa's watercolor paintings hanging alongside Sophie's vibrant drawings, Ethan's astronomy awards beside Rachel's nursing school diploma. The garden that had been overgrown and neglected now flourished with vegetables and flowers tended by all four of them during weekend gardening sessions that inevitably ended with dirt-smudged faces and impromptu water fights. In the converted garage, Ethan's observatory had taken shape, a telescope mounted on a custom platform, star charts covering the walls, a comfortable chair where Sophie often sat while her stepbrother explained the mysteries of distant galaxies. The treehouse James and Ethan had built over the summer became Sophie's art studio during warm weather, its small windows offering the perfect light for her increasingly sophisticated drawings. Inside, the kitchen island had indeed become the heart of their home. Homework was completed, their meals prepared, late-night conversations shared over tea or hot chocolate. The rhythms of their combined lives had settled into comfortable patterns, morning rushes tempered by Rachel's organizational skills, evening routines enriched by James's storytelling talents, weekends balanced between scheduled activities and spontaneous adventures. Not that the transition had been seamless. The first months had brought inevitable clashes. Sophie's exuberant messiness versus Ethan's precise organization. Rachel's early rising hospital schedule disrupting James's preference for quiet mornings, divergent opinions on appropriate bedtime, screen time limits, and vegetable consumption requirements. Each conflict required negotiation, compromise, occasional retreats to separate corners to cool down before returning to the table with clearer heads. Margaret had become a regular presence. Sunday dinners at her home now expanded to include Rachel and Sophie without the earlier tension. She'd even begun teaching Sophie to knit, something she had once shared with Lisa, passing down family traditions to this child who had unexpectedly become part of her legacy. The photo of Lisa that had once dominated Margaret's mantle was now accompanied by a family portrait taken at Christmas, All four of them in coordinating sweaters, plus Margaret, plus the rescue dog they'd adopted in September. Galileo named by Ethan, but quickly nicknamed Leo by Sophie. Today's celebration marked both their one-year anniversary as a blended family and the completion of Sophie's 3-month oncology checkups, her doctor finally confident enough in her continued remission to return to the standard 6-month schedule. Double cause for the decorations currently being hung in the backyard, for the cake cooling on the counter, for the unmistakable atmosphere of joy permeating their home. James stood at the kitchen window watching Rachel direct the children in hanging paper lanterns from tree branches. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, tendrils escaping to frame her face as she laughed at something Sophie said. The simple gold band on her left hand caught the afternoon sunlight, not an engagement ring, but a promise ring he'd given her 6 months earlier. A symbol of commitment without pressure, acknowledging the profound connection they'd formed while respecting the complexities of their situation. Their relationship had deepened over the year of living together, growing stronger through both challenges and celebrations. The connection that had begun with a whispered recognition on a doorstep had evolved into something James had never expected to find again after Lisa's death, a partnership of equals built on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that encompassed not just each other, but the children who had brought them together. Outside, Ethan climbed higher in the oak tree, carefully securing a string of lights that would illuminate their celebration once darkness fell. At 11 now, he'd grown inches over the past year, his face losing some of its childish roundness, his interests expanding beyond astronomy to include photography, particularly capturing candid moments of their evolving family. The memory box Lisa had created now sat on a special shelf in his room, no longer hidden, but integrated into his life, occasionally shared with Sophie when he wanted to tell her stories about the mother he'd known. Sophie remained small for her age, her growth still affected by the aggressive treatments that had saved her life. But what she lacked in stature, she more than made up for in presence. Her artistic talents had blossomed under the encouragement of her art teacher, resulting in a scholarship to a prestigious weekend program for gifted children. The experience had transformed her from a child who enjoyed drawing to one who spoke confidently about perspectives and techniques, who discussed color theory with the seriousness of a much older student. Rachel waved when she noticed James watching them, gesturing for him to join the decorating efforts. He smiled, nodding to indicate he'd be right there. First, though, he needed to retrieve the special gift he'd hidden in his office, a custom photo book documenting their first year together, culminating in the question he planned to ask tonight under those same twinkling lights currently being strung through the branches. The small velvet box sat beside the photo album containing the vintage sapphire ring he'd selected with Margaret's help, a gesture that had meant as much to his mother as it would to Rachel. The jeweler had sized it perfectly, using one of Rachel's other rings, maintaining the original Art Deco setting while securing the stone more firmly. It wasn't traditional, wasn't brand new, but it carried history and character, much like the family they were building. James tucked both items into his desk drawer, heart quickening at the thought of the evening ahead. He wasn't nervous about Rachel's answer. They'd discussed marriage in theoretical terms, agreeing it was in their future, but the moment itself still carried weight significance, a formal acknowledgement of the life they'd already begun creating together. The doorbell rang, announcing Margaret's arrival with her contribution to the celebration, her famous lemon tarts that Sophie had declared life-changing after her first bite. James greeted his mother with a hug, noting the relaxed set of her shoulders, the genuine warmth in her smile as she asked about the evening's preparations. "Everything's ready." James relieved her of the dessert tray. "The kids are hanging the last decorations. Rachel's finishing the salad. All we need are our guests." Margaret patted his arm, her expression knowing. And perhaps a certain question to be asked, James grinned, unable to contain his excitement. "Even with his mother, and how did you know?" "A mother always knows." Margaret's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Besides, you've been checking your pocket every 5 minutes at Sunday dinners for weeks. Not exactly subtle, James." He laughed, acknowledging the truth in her observation. "And you're okay with this? Really okay?" Margaret's expression softened, the grief that had once dominated her features when discussing his future now replaced by acceptance, even happiness. "More than okay. Lisa would want this for you, James. For Ethan. This family you've built, it honors her memory rather than replacing it. It took me too long to see that." The afternoon unfolded in a blur of arrivals, Rachel's colleagues from the hospital, James's fellow teachers, neighbors, who had welcomed their blended family with casseroles and lawnmowers, loaned during those first chaotic weeks. The children darted between adult conversations, proudly showing off their home improvements, Leo following at their heels with joyful abandon. As twilight approached, the paper lanterns and string lights created a magical glow in the backyard. James caught Rachel's eye across the gathering, a silent communication passing between them. Appreciation for this moment, for these people, for the life they'd created together. She excused herself from a conversation, making her way to his side with the natural gravity that had always pulled them toward each other. Happy anniversary. Her smile held a year's worth of shared moments, both significant and mundane, the building blocks of their relationship. The best year. James slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her closer. And hopefully just the beginning. Rachel leaned into him, her body fitting against his with familiar comfort. Remember when Sophie spilled juice on Ethan's shirt right before for our first real date? And then your mother showed up early? I was so nervous I could barely speak. James chuckled at the memory. And now look at them. He nodded toward the treehouse where Margaret sat with both children, apparently deep in conversation about Sophie's latest art project, judging by the sketchbook open across their laps. Rachel's expression grew more serious, her voice softening. I never thought I'd have this again. A family, a partner. After everything with Kevin, with Sophie's illness, I'd convinced myself it was just going to be the two of us. That was enough, more than enough, but this. She gestured around them, encompassing their home, their guests, their life. This is beyond anything I imagined possible. James pressed a kiss to her temple, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo, mingled with the citrus lotion she always used. I know exactly what you mean. The evening progressed with toasts, laughter, shared memories of the past year. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, James felt a growing anticipation, the weight of the ring box in his pocket, a constant reminder of what was to come. He had planned to wait until everyone left to create an intimate moment just for the two of them. But as he watched Rachel with their children, her head thrown back in laughter at something Ethan said, her arm around Sophie's shoulders, he realized the perfect moment wasn't about privacy or elaborate staging. It was about family. With a quick glance at Margaret, who gave an encouraging nod, James cleared his throat. Could I have everyone's attention for a moment? The remaining guests quieted conversations, pausing as they turned toward him. Ethan, recognizing something significant in his father's tone, nudged Sophie, both children watching with curious expressions. 1 year ago, we moved into this house. James began, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. But the truth is, we started becoming a family long before that, from the moment Rachel whispered those words on my doorstep that changed everything. Rachel's eyes widened slightly as she realized what was happening, her hands clasping together against her heart. Every day since then has been a gift. James continued, moving to stand before her. Every challenge we've faced together, every celebration we've shared, every ordinary Tuesday morning, with breakfast dishes and school lunches and rushed goodbyes, all of it has shown me that what we have is extraordinary. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing the small velvet box, aware of Sophie's sharp intake of breath, of Ethan's broad smile, of Margaret's quiet tears. Kneeling before Rachel, he opened the box to reveal the sapphire ring nestled inside. Rachel Carson. I don't have to imagine spending the rest of my life with you, because I'm already living that dream every day. But I would be honored if you would make it official. Will you marry me? Rachel's eyes shimmered with tears, her smile radiant, as she nodded, too overwhelmed for words momentarily. Yes. Her voice emerged as a whisper, then stronger. Yes, James. Yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, their small audience erupted in cheers. Sophie jumping up and down, Ethan pumping his fist in the air, Margaret dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, their remaining friends applauding the moment. James stood, drawing Rachel into an embrace that conveyed everything words couldn't: gratitude, joy, promise, commitment. The children rushed forward, turning the embrace into a family huddle, their excitement bubbling over in a tangle of questions about wedding dates and plans. Rachel laughed, her arms encompassing both children, as she glanced down at the ring now adorning her finger. It's beautiful. Her voice was soft with wonder. How did you know? James smiled, acknowledging Margaret with a nod. I had some help. From someone who understands that the most meaningful things often carry history with them. Margaret stepped forward, her composure regained, though her eyes remained bright with emotion. It belonged to my grandmother. She offered a gentle smile to Rachel. And now it belongs to the woman who has brought joy back to my son's life and who I am proud to welcome as a daughter. The simple words, so long in coming, brought fresh tears to Rachel's eyes. She released the children to embrace Margaret, the last barriers between them finally dissolving in this moment of shared happiness. The wedding planning began almost immediately with Sophie appointing herself chief creative director and Ethan assuming responsibility for logistical considerations, including detailed spreadsheets that impressed even Margaret. They settled on a date 6 months away, a spring ceremony in the backyard where they had already created so many family memories, intimate rather than elaborate, celebrating what already existed, rather than creating something entirely new. Life continued in its everyday rhythms around the wedding preparations, school projects, work commitments, doctor appointments, holidays. Christmas brought Sophie's father, Kevin, back into their orbit briefly, his annual phone call supplemented this year by an announcement of his upcoming visit. He'd remarried, had twin toddlers with his new wife, had established a life in California that included Sophie only at the periphery. The news of his visit created ripples of anxiety throughout their household. Sophie, who spoke to her father monthly but hadn't seen him in person for nearly 3 years, vacillated between excitement and apprehension. Rachel maintained a careful neutrality, supporting Sophie's relationship with her father while protecting her from potential disappointment. James found himself unexpectedly territorial, concerned about how this man who had abandoned his family might disrupt the security they'd worked so hard to build. Kevin's actual arrival proved anticlimactic compared to the anticipation. He checked into a hotel rather than staying with them, scheduled brief visits around his business meetings, brought expensive gifts that demonstrated his financial success more than his understanding of his daughter's current interest. Sophie was polite but reserved, showing him her art studio and recent projects with the careful pride of someone unsure how their achievements will be received. The most difficult moment came during Kevin's final dinner with them, when he casually mentioned his plans to relocate his entire family to London for a 2-year work assignment. Sophie's face had frozen in a practiced smile as she absorbed this information, her already distant father moving even further away. The tenuous connection between them stretched thinner across oceans and time zones. Later that night, after Kevin had departed with promises to call soon and invitations for Sophie to visit that lacked concrete details, James found her sitting alone on the porch swing, uncharacteristically quiet as she stared up at the winter stars. He settled beside her without speaking, offering his presence while giving her space to process her feelings. After several minutes of silence, Sophie's small voice emerged vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "He's never going to be a real dad, is he? The kind that shows up for science fairs and remembers what books I like and worries when I get sick." James considered his response carefully, balancing honesty with compassion. Some people aren't able to be the parents we need them to be. It doesn't mean they don't love us. It means they have limitations, things inside themselves that make it hard for them to show love in the ways we recognize. Sophie leaned against his side, seeking comfort. "Mom says he left because he was scared when I got sick, that he couldn't handle it. But you're not scared of that stuff." James wrapped his arm around her small shoulders, his heart aching for this child who had faced so many adult realities in her young life. "I do get scared. When you had those tests last summer, I was terrified. The thought of you being sick again, of what that would mean for you, for your mom, for all of us, it was overwhelming. But you stayed." Sophie looked up at him, her expression serious in the moonlight. "You didn't run away." James squeezed her shoulder gently. "Your mom taught me something important, Sophie. Courage isn't about not feeling afraid. It's about feeling the fear and staying anyway. Loving anyway. Being present anyway." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing his words. "Is it okay if sometimes I think of you as my dad? Not instead of my real dad, but like an extra dad, the kind that's actually here?" James felt his throat tighten with emotion, overwhelmed by the simple, profound question. This bright, resilient child who had endured more in her 10 years than many adults face in a lifetime was offering him a place in her heart that he hadn't dared explicitly seek. "I would be honored." His voice emerged rough with feeling, beyond honored. Sophie nodded decisively, as if settling an important matter in her mind. "Good, I thought so, but I wanted to make sure." The conversation marked a subtle but significant shift in their family dynamics. Sophie began occasionally calling James dad, alongside referring to Kevin as my dad in California. She sought James out for help with homework, for advice about friendship challenges, for the everyday parenting moments that Kevin's distance had made impossible. Not replacing her biological father, but acknowledging the nurturing presence James had become in her life. Winter melted into early spring, the wedding date approaching with increasing momentum. Rachel's dress hung in Margaret's spare bedroom closet, a simple ivory sheath with delicate lace overlay, elegant rather than elaborate, selected with Sophie's enthusiastic approval. James and Ethan had matching suits, though Ethan had negotiated for Converse sneakers instead of dress shoes, a compromise Rachel had supported with a wink to James about picking their battles. The backyard transformation had begun. Perennials planted along newly mulched flower beds, the treehouse given a fresh coat of paint, string lights permanently installed among the tree branches. The ceremony would be small, the reception relaxed and intimate, befitting a family already formed and simply celebrating their official union. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sophie's routine 6-month oncology checkup appeared on the calendar, a date that still brought an automatic tightening in Rachel's shoulders despite years of clear results. James had arranged to take the day off work, as he did for all medical appointments, the four of them approaching these milestones as a united front regardless of outcome. The initial appointment proceeded as usual, blood-drawn physical examination completed, Sophie chatting animatedly with medical staff who had known her since diagnosis. The doctor's expression revealed nothing concerning his manner, reassuring as he discussed Sophie's continued growth and development. They left the hospital with the familiar instruction to await blood test results, expected within 2 days as always. That night, Rachel was uncharacteristically quiet, moving through evening routines with mechanical precision, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. After the children were asleep, she disappeared into their bathroom for a long shower, a coping mechanism James had come to recognize when her anxiety needed release without burdening others. When she emerged, hair damp around her shoulders, eyes slightly red-rimmed, though she'd clearly tried to hide evidence of tears, James was waiting with a cup of her favorite chamomile tea. He didn't speak, didn't push, simply offered the warmth in his presence as she settled beside him on their bed. "What if it comes back, James?" Her voice finally emerged barely above a whisper. "Right before the wedding. Right when everything is so perfect." James set his own tea aside, turning to face her fully. "Then we adjust. We postpone if we need to. We focus on what matters most. Sophie's health, our family's well-being. The wedding is just one day. Our life together is much bigger than that." Rachel nodded, drawing a shaky breath. "I know that logically. I do. But I can't help thinking." She hesitated, vulnerability written across her features. "Maybe we're tempting fate, being too happy, too confident about the future." James took her hands in his touch gentle but grounding. "That's the fear talking, not reality. We're not being punished for happiness, Rachel. Whatever happens with these test results, and I truly believe they'll be fine, it has nothing to do with whether we deserve whoop or stability or love." Rachel leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder, allowing herself to be held to receive comfort rather than always being the strong one. "I've spent so many years braced for the next crisis, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sometimes I don't know how to live without that vigilance." James stroked her hair, understanding her fear on a level that went beyond words. They had both experienced profound loss, different in nature, but similar in impact. Both had learned the hard way that life offered no guarantees that loved ones could be taken without warning, that planning for the future required a certain faith that neither came by naturally anymore. "Maybe we don't have to figure it out alone." His voice was soft in the quiet bedroom. "Maybe that's the point of this, of us. We carry that knowledge together now. We share the weight of it." Rachel lifted her head, meeting his gaze with eyes that held both vulnerability and strength, the paradox that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "I love you, James Thompson." Her voice was steady now, the momentary fear receding. "Whatever comes next, I'm grateful for this. For you. For the family we've built." James brushed a strand of damp hair from her face, his touch reverent. "And I love you, all of you, your strength and your fear, your hope and your worry, the whole magnificent, complicated person you are." The call came the following afternoon, all clear, all markers normal, no cause for concern. Relief flooded their household, Sophie celebrating with theatrical bows and declarations that she was officially the healthiest almost stepdaughter in the world. Ethan suggesting ice cream as the obvious response to good news, both children blissfully unaware of the private fears their parents had sheltered them from. That evening, with the children engrossed in a movie downstairs, James found Rachel in their walk-in closet, fingers trailing over her wedding dress bag, with a distant smile. The burden lifted from her shoulders. She looked younger, somehow, unburdened by the weight of constant vigilance, if only temporarily, ready to become Mrs. Thompson James leaned against the doorframe, watching her with unabashed adoration. Rachel turned, her smile widening. Actually, I was thinking we might both become Thompson's Carson. All of us. A new family name for our new beginning. James raised his eyebrows, surprised but intrigued by the suggestion. Really, you'd want that? Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. Sophie and I have been Carsons since the divorce. You and Ethan are Thompsons. But what we're creating together is something new, not erasing what came before but building upon it. Thompson's Carson feels right, if you're open to it. James crossed the room to her, taking both her hands in his. I love the idea. And I love that you're thinking about our family in those terms, honoring our past while creating our shared future. The wedding day dawned, clear and bright cherry blossoms from their newly planted trees drifting like snow across the freshly mowed lawn. Margaret arrived early, bringing traditional silver sixpence for Rachel's shoe and the something blue handkerchief that had belonged to James's grandmother. Rachel's hospital colleagues transformed the kitchen into a styling station, helping with hair and makeup, while Sophie flitted between rooms, simultaneously serving as flower girl, junior bridesmaid, and self-appointed documentary photographer. Upstairs, James and Ethan straightened ties and adjusted boutonnieres, the boy unusually solemn as he considered his reflection in the mirror. Dad, do you think Mom would like Rachel? Like if they could have met, James met his son's eyes in the mirror, recognizing the importance of the question. I think they would have respected each other immediately. Both strong, compassionate women who dedicate their lives to helping others. Both fiercely protective of the people they love. Ethan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. I'm going to put one of Mom's sunflower pins in my pocket today, as my something borrowed. Sophie said that was okay, even though I'm not the bride. James felt his throat tighten with emotion, overwhelmed by his son's thoughtfulness, by the way he integrated Lisa's memory into this new chapter, rather than compartmentalizing the past. That's a wonderful idea, buddy. Your mom would be honored. The ceremony itself was simple but profound, vows exchanged beneath an arch of spring flowers. Ethan standing proudly as best man, Sophie beaming as she clutched her small bouquet, Margaret serving as their witness, close friends and family gathered in chairs arranged on the lawn. Rachel was radiant in her ivory dress, her auburn hair caught up in a loose arrangement with tendrils framing her face. James, watching her approach on her brother's arm, felt a sense of awe that this extraordinary woman had chosen to build a life with him. Their personal vows acknowledged the unlikely path that had brought them together. Cells donated anonymously, creating a literal lifeline between strangers' grief and healing. Intertwined second chances emerging from life's most challenging moments. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering as Rachel spoke of becoming a family long before becoming husband and wife, as James promised to love not just her, but Sophie as his own, as both children were invited forward for a special exchange of promises that recognized their central role in this union. The reception unfolded across their backyard tables, set beneath flowering trees, children running with bubbles, and laughter generations mingling over cake and champagne. James found himself momentarily overcome as he watched his family, his mother deep in conversation with Rachel's brother Ethan teaching younger cousins how to use his telescope. Sophie proudly showing off her latest paintings to admiring guests. Rachel moving through it all with graceful joy, stopping occasionally to admire the sapphire ring, now accompanied by a simple gold band. I don't think I've ever seen you look so happy. David Chen, James's colleague and longtime friend, appeared beside him, offering a fresh glass of champagne. It suits you, James accepted the drink with a grateful nod. It's still sometimes hard to believe this is my life. After Lisa died, I couldn't imagine ever feeling whole again. And now, David followed his gaze to where Rachel was laughing at something Sophie said, the afternoon light, catching the auburn highlights in both their hair, the resemblance between mother and daughter striking despite the lack of biological connection. Life has a funny way of circling back, doesn't it? David observed. 3 years ago, a stranger saved Sophie without knowing her name. Now here you are. Here we are. James echoed the simple phrase encompassing the profound journey from that first anonymous donation to this day of celebration. The evening wound down gently, guests departing with well wishes and leftovers until only the immediate family remained, James and Rachel Ethan and Sophie Margaret, who would stay in the guest room rather than driving home. They sat together on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, the string lights twinkling to life automatically as darkness began to fall. Well, Mrs. Thompson, Carson James squeezed Rachel's hand, the new name still novel on his tongue. How does it feel to make it official? Rachel leaned against his shoulder, contentment radiating from her, like the most natural thing in the world. Like we've always been heading here, even when we didn't know it. Sophie, curled in an Adirondack chair with Leo at her feet, looked up from the flower crown she was weaving from reception table centerpieces. Mom, can we talk about getting a little brother or sister now that you're officially married? The unexpected question hung in the air for a moment, both adults momentarily speechless. Rachel recovered first, sharing a quick glance with James before addressing her daughter. That's something we might discuss privately first, sweetheart. Ethan sprawled on a nearby bench, flipping through photos on his camera, didn't look up as he added, "They're probably worried about telling us they're already expecting. That's why Mom hasn't had any wine today and has been taking those vitamins in the medicine cabinet." Now all eyes turned to Rachel, whose cheeks had flushed pink in the fading light. James felt his heart rate accelerate as he studied her expression, seeing confirmation in her eyes before she spoke. "I was planning to tell you tonight." Rachel's voice was soft with wonder and slight apprehension. "After everyone left, I only found out for certain 3 days ago. It's very, very early." James could only stare in amazement, joy blooming in his chest alongside disbelief. After Sophie's illness, after the aggressive treatments that had saved her life, Rachel had been told further pregnancies were unlikely, if not impossible. They had discussed it when their relationship became serious, agreeing their family was already complete, that biological connection wasn't necessary for the bonds they shared. But now, Rachel's hand drifted to her still flat stomach, a protective gesture so instinctual, she seemed unaware of making it. The doctors say it's something of a miracle given everything, but healthy so far, due in December. James gathered her into his arms, too overwhelmed for words, momentarily feeling the wetness of tears on his cheeks. When he could finally speak, his voice emerged rough with emotion. "Another gift, another unexpected blessing I never thought to ask for." Margaret wiped away tears of her own, reaching out to squeeze Rachel's hand. "When Lisa was pregnant with Ethan, she craved peppermint ice cream at all hours. I kept it stocked in my freezer for her middle-of-the-night cravings. I'll do the same for you." The simple offer, so practical and yet so deeply meaningful, brought fresh tears to Rachel's eyes. She squeezed Margaret's hand in wordless gratitude. Sophie approached, her expression a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "Will you still want me when you have a baby of your own?" Her voice was small vulnerability, showing through her usual confidence. Rachel opened her arms, drawing her daughter into the embrace she still shared with James. "Sophie Thompson Carson, you listen to me. No baby, whether growing inside me or adopted or appearing on our doorstep like a miracle, could ever replace you. You are my firstborn, my brave girl, my heart walking outside my body. Nothing will ever change that." James tightened his arm around both of them, including Sophie fully in their circle. "And you will always be my first daughter. The one who drew pictures of her cell buddy without knowing who he was. The one who showed me it was possible to love again, to be a father in new ways." Ethan joined them, then completing their family circle as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear above them. Sophie's head rested against her mother's shoulder. Ethan leaned into his father's side, and between them all flowed the invisible connections that had brought them together. Bone marrow and blood loss and discovery, chance and choice, biology and intention. Later that night, after the children were asleep and Margaret had retired to the guest room, James and Rachel stood in their bedroom. Now truly theirs, in every sense, their marriage certificate, signed in their future together, formally acknowledged before friends and family. Rachel had changed from her wedding dress into comfortable pajamas, her hair loose around her shoulders, the elegant bride transformed back into the woman he woke beside each morning, somehow more beautiful to him in this everyday form than in any formal attire. Do you believe in fate, James? Her voice was thoughtful as she removed her jewelry, carefully placing her rings in the dish on her nightstand. Or just random chance that sometimes works out in unexpected ways? James considered the question as he hung up his suit jacket, thinking about the series of events that had brought them here. His decision to donate marrow after Lisa's death, Rachel's position at the hospital, allowing her to connect those dots years later. Sophie's illness, bringing them together, even as it nearly tore her family apart, Ethan's immediate bond with the little girl who would become his sister. Randomness seemed insufficient to explain such a perfectly aligned sequence, yet fate suggested a predetermined path that diminished their active choices along the way. I believe in possibilities. He finally answered, moving to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. In doors that open when we're brave enough to knock. In connections that form when we're open to receiving them. In love that finds us when we're ready to recognize it. Rachel leaned back against him, her body fitting perfectly against his, as it had from the beginning. I never thought I'd feel this safe again. After Kevin left, after nearly losing Sophie, I built walls to protect us both. But somehow you and Ethan slipped right through them. James pressed a kiss to her temple, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume mingled with the lingering sweetness of wedding cake frosting. Not through them. You opened the door yourself, Rachel. That day on my porch, that whisper that changed everything. She turned in his arms, her expression serene in the soft lamplight. You know what Sophie said to me right before the ceremony? That she drew that picture of you, the one she called her cell buddy, the night before your sister suggested setting us up. Said she had a dream about the man whose cells saved her, and he looked remarkably like you. Down to the gray at your temples that you're so self-conscious about. James raised an eyebrow, bemused. Really? And you believe that? Rachel smiled, a hint of mystery in her eyes. When I saw you standing in that doorway, I almost couldn't speak. It was like seeing a ghost, or a miracle. Maybe a little of both. James pulled her closer, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them here from strangers, connected by an anonymous donation to partners, sharing a life, a home, a family that would soon grow again in ways they'd never anticipated. The odds against each piece falling into place exactly as it had were astronomical, yet here they stood, living proof that sometimes the most unlikely paths led exactly where they were meant to go. Whether chance or fate, miracle, or simply the mysterious ways love found its course, they had arrived at this moment together. Their past honors but not defining them. Their present rich with connection, their future unfolding with possibilities. They continued to create together, day by day, choice by choice, love by love. Outside their window, the string lights from their wedding still twinkled in the darkness, illuminating the yard where they had exchanged vows, where their children played, where their expanded family would grow and change in the years to come. Inside, the quiet house breathed around them, Ethan's gentle snoring from across the hall, Sophie's nightlight casting star patterns on her ceiling, Margaret's presence a comforting reminder of family connections that transcended time and change. Leo curled at the foot of their bed, loyal guardian of their shared dreams. In this house that had become a home with these people who had become family, James and Rachel Thompson Carson stood at the threshold of their next chapter. Not a beginning exactly, for their story had started long before with cells exchanged between strangers, but a continuation. A recognition of the journey already traveled, and the path stretching before them, illuminated by the love they had found in life's most unexpected corners.